of the CityAdapt Resilient Cities platform. I'm Marta Moneo, and I coordinate the team for adaptation to climate change for the Office of Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Environmental Program. We have a very interesting session today where we're going to be introducing the content that has been generated for this platform for resilient cities, and its ultimate goal is to provide information, tools, methodologies, training about the work in climate change adaptation at a city level, and what is the information and the tools that are necessary to do urban planning that considers climate risks for the future and to minimize these risks, and what kinds of measures, when we talk about nature-based solutions for adaptation, what are the types of measures that can be applied at an urban level? What are the needs to have of coordination for the different levels of government, and how all of this is really brought into practice? For this event, to introduce the platform itself, we will have a group of representatives from the countries that are already giving a lot of importance to climate change adaptation at a subnational level and specifically at a city level. So we will be talking about the experiences in Panama, in Mexico, and in Uruguay. And to introduce the session, we have the pleasure of counting with our regional director for the Office of Latin America and the Caribbean, Juan Bello, and with Jorge Ville, the head of the General Division of International Associations in the Euroclima program, and another dear and main partners in these initiatives for resilient cities. So good morning, everyone. Juan, we go with you. Thank you very much, Marta, and a very good morning to everyone. For me, it is a pleasure and honor to share these opening words for this launching of the new platform CityAdapt. I would like to start by saying that climate impact in Latin America and the Caribbean is more and more frequent and intense. During the last 2 years, there have been a 175 registered disasters in the region, and 88% had meteorological, climatological, or hydrological origin. These events represent 40% of the deaths related to disasters and 71% of economic losses, transforming the region in one of the most vulnerable in the world. Consequently, this increase in frequency and intensity of meteorological events annually expose millions of people to insecurities, food insecurity, and lead to cascade impacts. For example, the greater risk of appearance of diseases, mortality, and conflicts. All of this undoubtedly leads us to have to adapt to the impacts of climate change, the current and future ones. In this sense, cities have a very important role in Latin America and the Caribbean, given that 80% of the population of the region is an urban population, and according to the Vulnerability to Climate Change Index, 48% of the capital cities of Latin America and the Caribbean show extreme risk towards negative effects and impacts of climate change. And because of this, it is urgent to move forward the actions that increase urban resilience in the region. The needs for investment in adaptation current are very go over the current financing for this year 2022. The annual costs for adaptation only in developing countries were calculated to be $71 billion, and this number should reach 280 and 500 billions in 2050. Nonetheless, out of the global financing that is dedicated to adaptation, cities received less than 5% in the periods of 2010 and 2014. Now, the good news is that there are cost effective solutions that bring multiple benefits. This year, the UN Assembly for the Environment, the UNEA, approved a common definition of nature-based solutions, showing consensus by all nations in recognizing nature-based solutions as an adequate framework to protect, conserve, recover, use, and manage in a sustainable way the ecosystems with multiple purposes, and one of them is climate resilience. You can look for the resolution 5.2, and there you can find this information. To give you some quick examples, nature-based solutions in cities allow us to reduce the heat wave effects, capture carbon capture, water management, and reduce risks that are associated to climate and natural events, reducing the number of victims and economic losses. There's also a potential to climate significantly the climate resilience in the cities, and nature-based solutions have multiple social and economic benefits, leading to green employment, conserving biodiversity, improving the air quality, and favoring environmental education and mental and physical health of persons. Cities are composed by interdependent complex systems that can be taken advantage of to push forward the implementation of nature-based solutions in different sectors and at different scales or levels of governance. This allows us to move towards synergies with public and private investment towards new ways to manage the use of land and to the creation of subsistence systems and the protection of ecosystems. To answer, to be able to respond to all these needs by promoting the implementation of nature-based solution and the construction of resilient cities, the UNEP, in alliance with Euroclima, who is joining us today in this event, has developed this platform called CityAdapt that we are launching today that will become, we hope, in a knowledge exchange tool for the cities in Latin America and the Caribbean and the world. So, for the purpose of this launching, it is a pleasure to have an who will be helping us position the important roles of cities in the advances towards the goals of resilient, just, and fair development. I'd like to thank our strategic partners, Aeroclima and the Green Fund for Climate, the Global Fund for the Environment, the Ministries of the Environment, who, with their support, have allowed us to carry out this sort of initiative. Of course, I'd also like to thank the UNEP team that has been behind the design and development of this platform. And I'd also like to thank the panelists and participants that are joining us today in this event. I hope that you all have a very productive session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan. Indeed, this is a joint effort that includes many forces or many different partners. One of them, a very important one, with whom we're collaborating in this initiative and many others in climate change
for example, by creating 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030. I'm sure you all have heard of the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal came out 3 years ago, and it's really a very ambitious set of environmental objectives, which the European Commission has launched. It is supposed to transform the European Union in a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy. Among the many goals that it has, there are 3 I would like to highlight. One is to arrive at net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. The second one is to decouple economic growth from the use of greenhouse gases, but also very importantly, to leave nobody behind in this transformation process that we are. So there's a very strong social component here. I'm not only an EU official, I'm also an EU citizen. And as an EU citizen, I'm actually quite proud that the European Union came up with this high level of ambition. And of course, we know that Europe is only a small part of the world. And that's why the European Green Deal also has an external component. We also want to discuss with our partners globally about these objectives. And this includes, of course, the Latin American Caribbean region, which is very, very dear to us for a number of reasons, not only for historic and cultural ties, but also because we believe it's a region that contributes not very much, around 8% to greenhouse gas emissions, but suffers disproportionately a lot. And so we have, from the EU side, always put a number of initiatives and programs in place in order to help around the world and also in the LAC region. One such initiative that you may have heard is the Global Covenant of Mayors, which we are also trying to support from the EU side, which is really a global platform for cities and local governments to work towards the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Already 583 cities from the LAC region have been joining this Global Covenant of Mayors, and all of them have committed themselves to adaptation and mitigation goals. Another initiative in this context is indeed Euroclima, and that happens to be the initiative that I'm working for. So in Euroclima, we are also trying to assist the countries in the Latin America and in the future also in the Caribbean region to adapt their climate policies and to implement them as good as possible. So whenever they seek support from the European Union in this context, we stand ready to assist. Of course, funding is never enough, and we know that. But I think there's a number of interesting things that we have been doing also in urban issues in Euroclima. And so we've been working with UNEP on its climate change agenda in the LAC region, and in order to provide concrete responses to increase the local capacities and to create tools for improving decision-making for urban planning. And I believe this is also where the CityAdapt fits in very well. So this is why I'm very happy to be here today, because I think the idea of the CityAdapt platform is to offer a space of information and knowledge to exchange and to develop tools that can and hopefully will help more cities in Latin America and the region to adapt strategically. CityAdapt emphasizes, among others, the importance of implementing nature-based solutions to face this climate crisis, which, as we know from the IPCC report, is fundamental in providing both adaptation and mitigation benefits. Both CityAdapt and the Nature for Cities already help 16 cities in 10 countries in the region like this one, with the benefits that they're bringing, and that the possibility that we have to showcase success stories, that we can reach more stakeholders, both from governments but also private sector investors, in order to bring it all together so that we can finance projects that will help cities and urban areas to adapt to the inevitable impacts of climate change that face all of us. With these words, back to you, Marta, and thanks a lot. Disculpe por todo en inglés, pero back to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Horst. Gracias por esas palabras.
Thank you, Horst, for your words. And now we would like to talk about the content in this platform that is being launched and that will be accelerating the actions and the work that we do in the next or in the coming 2-3 years with the support of our partners. I have colleagues that are organizing the meeting. I'm not able to share the screen right now. I'd like to share the screen to share the platform. Please help me with that. In the meantime, I'll tell you that the CityAdapt platform rises from the work that we are doing in the environment with many partners in the region in resilient cities. It is a platform. Well, these are two initiatives that are funded by the Green Climate Fund and the Environmental Fund. Hold on a second.
Como decía, pues, y de hecho aquí
I was saying, and in fact, the picture here is Jalapa. Jalapa is one of the cities that participated, one of the original participants of the City Adapts. Mr. Fernando Ramirez knows it very well. And I was saying the concept of this platform came out of these initiatives for City Adapt and nature cities that are being implemented in 7 countries in the region, in 16 or 18 cities. And the objective is to understand the risks that cities are subject to in Latin America and the Caribbean, while the scenarios of climate change and how the specific setup of each city and where it's built will really determine its level of vulnerability. It's very common that when we work on urban planning, the actors focus or stakeholders focus on their administrative context and setting themselves within the limits of their working area. But we are talking about the impacts of climate change and climate risks, and many times we have to look beyond administrative borders and we have to look at things from an ecosystemic perspective or a landscape perspective to really understand the magnitude and the elements that can make these risks even more serious. So this initiative has the objective of analyzing the things that can be used to address climate change objectives that are based on an integrated risk analysis from an environmental or ecosystemic perspective. Therefore, these initiatives are focused on strengthening the information to analyze risk in a more efficient way and implementing pilots for nature-based solutions at different scales, especially initiatives that are financed by the Environmental World Fund, and also the financing mechanisms that can be applied at a subnational level to foster and make the implementation of these strategies sustainable, and the types of indicators or monitoring frameworks that we can use to be really measuring the impact that these strategies have. Marta, you're not sharing your screen. You're allowed to do it. Oh, I thought I was. I'm sorry. Can you see it now? Yes. This is right on time. This is a small diagram that we created trying to analyze how a city or each city is always built within an ecosystem or a basin. Sometimes there are several basins within the same city, and how to analyze the flooding risk within an urban area. We have to consider what is happening upstream from that city, what's happening with the use of the soil, and what's happening with the changes in the filtration capacity of the soil that those ecosystems that are outside of the city have, and also inside the city. This is an example so that you can look at the type of analysis that we're doing through the initiatives that we will be sharing in the platform. This is the city of San Salvador, where we did an analysis of the potential for flooding. This diagram shows a real flood that happened in 2020 and how analyzing the built area, and this is the lower area of the volcano. You can see right there, the types of solutions that are proposed can be very different if the analysis is done in a more integrated way, considering all of the basing and understanding what is happening in the high area of the volcano and what's happening in the land that is draining water towards the city, and what type of combined solutions we can implement within and also outside of the city to improve the filtration capacity and also the water retention capacity of the soil in the systems that are outside of the city. To continue, so once again, this type of analysis, which will be included in the platform for each one of the cities that will be or is participating, in fact, in these initiatives. And we want these methodologies that are being developed, we want to share them with other cities that could participate in the initiative. Now I'm going to go to the next one. And well, with this, I'd like to describe the elements in the platform. We have the logo. This was a exercise that included a lot of thought to include elements from nature, persons, citizens, as Horst was saying, that in the end, this initiative is trying to bring to the citizens or the end users, the stakeholders, what is our capacity of action as individuals, our capacity of reaction in the face of climate change impacts. And we also have information about the advances from the CityAdapt project and the Resilient Cities project. We are gathering tools for risk analysis, also carbon footprint calculation tools. We are analyzing and creating a proposal for nature-based solutions that can help or contribute minimize carbon footprints in cities, and a learning center that already has some elements, and this is where we will be dedicating more effort next year. One of the important elements that we believe is very useful for stakeholders at a city level is the Explorer for nature-based solutions that we have built with examples and pilots in some projects. We have included a search engine where you can select a type of measure, and depending on the climate risk or the ecosystemic service that we are thinking about, and there it will give you about 40 different measures already. To give you some examples, each one of the measures is described in terms of the focus of that measure, the ecosystemic services that it's trying to protect or conserve, and the climate risks that this measure is trying to face. When these are measures that are described through case studies, we also have more specific information about the advances of the pilot cases and the impact on the cities. For each one of the measures, we have a document that we call the protocol. This is a more technical description about the elements that are in that measure, the technical design, the characteristics, and the implementation phases for this type of measure, and the elements that have to be integrated, including financial elements, for example, the cost that each one of these measures would have. This is also an example. The information that we are putting in this platform is we're trying to reach the greatest number of people possible, not just technicians, but we also doing a lot of work with schools and other educational centers. And therefore, part of the products that we have developed are also aimed at a broader public. This is the example of the description of artificial wetlands in a way that is apt for the consumption of a general public and even children. And this is for Mexico. We built these artificial wetlands in the technological center of Jalapa to filter wastewaters. And through the protocol and through this video here, we have an explanation of the benefit of this type of measure and where it can be implemented and the objectives or goals that it's trying to achieve. Here, the filtration gardens are being used to water the soccer or football fields in the technological center. Other elements that are included in the platform are guides, specific guides. For example, plants that can be used in bio gardens, using the or classifying the different type of plants in terms of their filtration capacity or for temperature control too. And in terms of the tools, we have information here about the analysis of vulnerability. These are the vulnerability analyses for Jalapa and for San Salvador, where the methodology that has been used for this analysis is being included. We include the different types of risks, flooding risk, erosion risk, even heat waves. In the platform, we also have the carbon footprint calculator that is being applied to the different cities to later see what the impact of a nature-based solution could be to mitigate that carbon footprint. And in the learning center, and I think this is the part where we will be focusing on next year, we have some information trying to get to the greatest number of audiences possible. We have even included some games for children and schools. And we also have publications. These are more technical and more specific in some cases of specific solutions, and also news, not just news from this initiative, but other initiatives that are also working on adaptation to climate change in cities. Next year, the elements that we will be working on will be an online course where we are collaborating with many research and knowledge institutions in the region for stakeholders in the region. We already created a course 2 years ago, and we had participation of 45 cities in the region. And now we are transforming that course into a more massive course that could be available to all cities or participants whenever they want to take it. We also will be establishing a community of practice. It will be hybrid because it will be a community of practice where we will take advantage of the analysis and discussion that we are doing in each one of the cities that are participating in the initiative, but also we want to bring this conversation to the virtual level or online level where we can not just discuss aspects and adaptation needs at a city level or individual city level, but also to establish comparisons amongst different cities to see where the main elements are or the common trends amongst the cities in Latin America and the Caribbean. And with this introduction to the platform that was brief, we hope that you can visit it. You hope you can visit cityadapt.com. And now I would like to go to the next phase of our session, and that is the conversation that we will be having with the experts that are joining us from the region. And as I said at the beginning, these are countries that are already giving a lot of importance to the work of climate change adaptation in cities. And this is in the face of climate action. I would like to welcome our colleagues. Just give me a second. I'm going to try to share, or maybe Ophelia or someone else can share, or make sure that we can see all the panelists. We have, everyone has their cameras on. So I wanted to introduce our colleagues I wanted to introduce Ligia Castro. Here we go. I see the three of you here. Okay, thank you. Ligia Castro is the Director of Climate Change in the Ministry of the Environment of Panama. Fernando Ramirez, who is the Director of Climate Change of the Environmental Secretariat of the State of Veracruz, and Mario Jimenez, and he is the Specialist of Adaptation of Climate Change of the Ministry of Environment of Uruguay. Thank you very much for being here this morning. And well, we wanted to start in the most global way possible and then go to the local. So taking advantage of having Ligia have participated in the COP, this COP that had a lot of movement in adaptation this year in loss and damages. We hope that all of those negotiations and international agreements have impact at this very much smaller scale. So Ligia, maybe you can tell us about the resolutions, the key resolutions in terms of adaptation in this last meeting and the negotiations, and how this can generate an impact at a city level or subnational level. Well, we were able to achieve advances also in the Santiago network. And I think this is going to be very useful for this platform that you just mentioned, how we could in some way articulate them. And something else that is very important, there was the approval of the funds for losses and damages, and we still have to define the mechanism to make this initiative concrete. But part of the topics that we have in our countries is that, or part of the issues is that not all of us, and I include Panama as one that hasn't done the test, not everyone quantifies their losses and damages. We just finished with the monitoring and evaluation system by indicators that was worked with the rest of the public institutions that are somehow related to this. And this will be very useful for the Ministry of Economy and Finance, because generally, when we go to international events, we ask for a lot, especially a lot of support. But at home, we don't do the necessary work. So to get support, you have to be able to show that you did your homework. And in some way, the ministries of economies and finances should not just have this information available and transparent, just like the ministries of the environment in the different climate transparency platforms, but in some way, our governments should prioritize the availability of resources to be able to address losses and damages that could be complemented then with international resources. Because if you continue thinking that we don't have to do anything with losses and damages until we don't have the fund, until the fund doesn't have any money, until someone gives us the money, we're not going to be able to address them. Considering that this year the increase in emissions was 10% at a global level, and this means that before we can stabilize the things are going to get worse, and we have to be aware of this. So this is something that in negotiations in some way we have to improve. We have to improve as a country. We, as countries, vulnerable countries, we say we haven't caused this, but what are we willing to do in our countries to make it possible to so that that financing can for losses and damages can get here. I also wanted to mention here your presentation. The way in which this platform can be connected to climate transparency platforms. We in Panama, and this is what we announced in the COP and caught the attention. And then we were invited to a event from KIF of how we are working on our climate transparency platforms. And in stage one, we did it with the UNEP, but that we conceived it not just to report transparently to the convention, but also a platform that can allow us to transform the reality of the country, and that also has a module that we have developed to strengthen capabilities, because part of the topics that we have in each one of these countries is, well, we have that module. We're going to incorporate the first free course that's going to be active all the time. That's why I like what you said about the next course will be permanent or available permanently. And if some way here in strengthening capabilities, we can put the links so that all of the Panamanians can get to know it, and especially those who work in the municipality can go in. This course will allow the environmental consultants and the promoters of the different projects, they will provide them a step-by-step to integrate public investment projects or public or private investment projects, the analysis of risk and vulnerability for where the project is going to be carried out, the adaptation measures to manage it, but also prioritizing nature-based solutions, and the measures to reduce the carbon footprints of those projects, considering that it's about to be signed by the president, or the president is about to sign the executive decree that updates the regulation about environmental impact studies, and that it includes these aspects. Therefore, in January, any environmental impact study that goes into the system that does not identify the vulnerabilities and risks and enumerates the adaptation measures to manage them, prioritizing nature-based solutions, and that does not have the measures to reduce the carbon footprint of the project, will not be approved. And this will contribute to the natural cities, because any place or any city in the country will have this. Something else that also caught our attention during the COP, even though we use a reference of the climate change relation of Latin America, we included two aspects that will also be shown in the climate transparency platform. And I think these are also important for natural cities, a system for institutional system for climate change, and an interinstitutional system for climate change at a local level. So I'm going to talk about first at the national level because absolutely all public institutions will have to have climate change units, and these climate change units will be responsible of making sure that climate change is cross-cutting in that institution, and they will have to report their advances to the climate transparency platform. This will make sure that climate change is relevant for everything that the government is doing in any sector, and the local system, all the municipalities will have to have climate change units that do or create some sort of follow-up, make sure that the municipality has some index of vulnerability, a climate risk map, a carbon footprint, and water footprint. Because the climate change scenarios of Panama show that out of the 6 regions, only 3 will see an increase in rain. The rest will be seeing a reduction in rainfall, and also we will have important increases in day temperatures and minimal nighttime temperatures. Therefore, the water footprint is fundamental at a local level, at a municipal level, so that we can really, little by little, have plans for municipal climate action or plans for municipal planning and development that consider this information to prioritize projects to allow the, the municipalities to address the climate situation of the municipality in question. So as you see, all of these things are related, and this platform will contribute at a municipal level. The climate transparency in all our countries should contribute to transforming the way that planning and implementation from the government, but also private companies, because in one place you will have all the necessary information of the technical and scientific evidence for decision making at a private level. And something else that is very important that I am sure it happens in other countries, but it is happening definitely in Panama, and that is that in our universities, the university curriculum is still not including cross-cutting climate change into all careers. And I think it should be in absolutely all careers. We are having graduates from economy and finance, and in their studies, they never saw climate change, or psychologists, sociologists that will later have to be providing services to people who face these losses and damages, and they will not know how to help them because they have never heard about climate change and losses and damages. So that's on one side. If all the information is systematized and having the possibility of connecting that that um, transparent transparency platform with the Nature for Cities and the Santiago network will help the universities provide more theses for bachelor's, PhDs, and masters so that they can address or take on basic or applied research to resolve concrete uh, characteristics of climate change at a local level. Thank you, Ligia. I think you mentioned some very important elements of articulation, and that is one of the objectives of this platform. It's interesting to see the connection with the transparency platform. Also, what you said about transformation of the regulatory and political frameworks that are necessary to create the demands to integrate climate change into planning and drafting and construction processes, that institutional coordination through interinstitutional systems at local and national levels, and of course the contributions of universities and other research centers, and the need to train young people that in the end will be the leaders in a very short time. Thank you very much, Ligia. Let's go with Fernando now. Fernando knows about the CityAdapt project pretty well. It's been executed in Jalapa for a while now. And in his position as Director of Climate Change in the Secretariat of the State of Veracruz, maybe we can ask you about the mechanisms that are necessary to coordinate climate action at the different levels. National, as was saying Ligia, then state level for Mexico, and then local level. What is the importance of those coordination mechanisms and what is being done in Mexico? Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. In Mexico, and specifically in Veracruz, we do not have that level of development or the coordination mechanisms that we saw in Panama. They gave us excellent ideas of where to go. We do have a mechanism that is being built and that exists institutionally to have coordination at a national level with the different states. We call them states in Mexico. And these all these states, or the 32 states of the Republic of Mexico, are part of the Intersecretarial Commission of Climate Change, where we connect with the Natural Resources and Environmental Secretariat and the dependencies of the environment at a state or subnational level. We also include academia, civil society, the private sector, and the different sectors of the country. And we hold sessions regularly throughout the year, and we introduce different initiatives. We have the reports in the Framework Convention of the United Nations for Climate Change, and all of this is coordinated by the Climate Change and Technology Institute. And this is a very important forum where we introduce the advances at a national level and also the experiences at a subnational level. So it's an articulation mechanism that is very significant, that is gaining relevance. Within this mechanism, we have created and launched this year the Transferring for Climate Action at a Subnational Level system. We have been trained in this system. In the system, we have a mandate to report at a subnational level, and also the different municipalities that form the states. We report the measures for mitigation and adaptation that we are carrying out. This is done in a detailed format. We have to include the budget that is being invested in the measure. We have to talk about the beneficiaries, the actions. So we have to include many details. And there we are reporting the actions that, of course, have been carried out in Jalapa with the support of the CityAdapt project that opened way in Jalapa to incorporate all of these policies for climate action and incorporate to the work of the municipality of Jalapa. And this is being extended and, let's say, being shared with other municipalities that find themselves in the same position that I am in the direction of or direct of climate change of the state of Veracruz, because we with the municipalities build municipal agendas for climate change. Within these municipal agendas for climate change, we include the risk and vulnerability factors for the municipal territories. We also diagnose the inventory of, have a diagnostic of greenhouse gases for each municipality. We also work with the municipal officials and we work on the main environmental problems for the municipality. Mostly they are related to climate change, of course. We are talking about management of wastewater, solid waste in populations, and other factors. And finally, we built a matrix for measures and actions for mitigation and adaptation at a municipal level, considering the characteristics of each municipality and their capacity to intervene and the budgets that they would have to invest. And this is programmed at the short, medium, and long term. And a project is defined, and of course there is training. All of this is initial, or we don't have the scope that Ligia mentioned they have in Panama, but I think that we are in the right path, and this is the way that we are working on articulation right now. We're also updating our climate change law at a state level, and it will be important to include many of these experiences that we have learned, for example, from Ligia. We hope she can share how her structure works. It would be very important because this is a key moment for us to create the legal base that, of course, is fundamental. And it's fundamental to include all of these concepts of vulnerability and the adaptation measures that we have to implement the, well, what we call promoters in Mexico for projects of urban development and others to incorporate climate change measures. Well, in a very short summary, this is how we are articulating at the different levels. And just to clear up that in this year we have had a very important national effort so that adaptation measures are in the agenda at all levels of government. And this year we organized forums, regional forums, and then a national forum about adaptation to climate change. And the proposal from the government in Mexico is to build an adaptation policy from the basis, from the communities and the population. And we've had participation, especially of rural populations, and these have been very good events to look at the situation, real situation in our countries, and the different levels of awareness. And what I can say is that the population it is more important to address the problems that come because of the effects of climate change in the country. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando. As you mentioned, there are important elements, and one of them that I think about is the need to act in two directions. One, from the legislative or political framework with strategies and to the build in the different levels, but on the other hand, to also build information about the risks and about the vulnerabilities from the local level, considering that the impact of climate change has a very local context. It really depends on the specific environment and area and can be very different from one city to another. And in that context, Mario, I would ask you, in that perspective that we are seeing in these two presentations or proposals, they have scenarios that include a series of persons and professionals that have to have knowledge about climate change and have to have understanding about climate change in different sectors and environments. To get to that local level, what are the main needs or for tools or information or training that can exist at this sub-national or local level so that we can make sure that we have resilient urban environments? Thank you. Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. I think that there is definitely a need for articulation between the needs in adaptation and the elements that are necessary for training and education, not just of the professionals working at the different levels of governments, but also the civil society. Here in Uruguay, we are creating incentives and monitoring these needs at different levels. To mention one of the areas is that we have a national adaptation plan for cities and infrastructure, and at the time it led to a mapping of needs in terms of tools and training, both at national and local levels. This was important because it was the beginning, and in some way, it gave the initial direction for the different actions and measures and the strategy that, or the direction that the National Adaptation Plan needed to take. And this started with the first question. When we talk about adaptation in cities, so what are we including in terms of the word city? What are the limits of a city? Boundaries. Because we have, is it a marked area that is framed as city, or is it because the city has interactions with different areas? So we have to have a more ecosystemic view, one basin, two basins, interactions with productive areas. And this expanded or led to different strategic lines, and it led to the mapping. On the other hand, under the climate promise, that we would call this, well, not a survey, but a study, statistical study about the perception of citizens about climate change. How aware are citizens about this? And this went beyond adaptation, of course. How do they perceive climate change at a global level, and then how do they perceive it at a national level? This led us to generate within the conceptual framework of the planning for climate change. It led us to create a strategy with education, training, public access to information, education, and this was with cooperation that was both national and international. So we have this strategy that goes at different levels, and this year we are finishing with a mapping of the characterization of capabilities and opportunities that is reflected in the I plus D plus I about how climate information can be used. These advances have been generated because of other adaptation plans where there was technical assistance. For example, the Costas adaptation plan, where there were contributions and joint work done, and there was agreements with the national universities and the Hydraulic Institute of Cantabria, and they did some climate predictions, and we were able to see, according to the different scenarios, the RA6, how climate change was going to affect us. But it's no use to have Cantabria do it. There has to be a transfer of capabilities, not just to the local universities, but also to the people, and how to use this and how that we transform this into a different type of forecast. This was for extreme events in the coast and the ocean, situations with erosion. So how we use this to create forecasts about the effects on biodiversity? And now that we're talking about nature-based solutions that are important for adaptation measures, we also have to know how these climate forecasts or projections will affect biodiversity, or how they can affect water resources, for example. These are big topics that are still being worked on, well, not even worked on. They have been mapped as needs, and that we are trying to address right now through the second adaptation communication. We hope that for December, this will be presented with a second NDC and talked in depth about the nature-based solutions and capitalize on some action proposals, at least in the scenario for 2030. Well, I think I talked about everything a little bit. Well, those are our needs, and we are sort of creating that route with the team here of climate change. And We are doing this through Macarena. Macarena, my colleague, is creating a program about trainings at different areas and different levels with different target audiences. And this is all under the mapping that we have created. Thank you very much, Mario. I think that's also very interesting. It complements the other two presentations and it also mentions the importance of training, not just for government activities, but also training for citizens as individuals in the end, that all have responsibilities and what is our capacity to act and how can we participate in decision-making processes and what information and how to build the information also that can be very complicated, as we saw in the university with Cantabria, to transform that information into an element that can be used for decision making at different levels. And well, this is one of the exploration areas that you were mentioning. How do we do the risk analysis? What are the boundaries that we use for a risk analysis when we're talking about actions in cities, but the climate risks do not really respond to political or administrative boundaries? The level or intensity of the risks, how would they be affected by other processes that are not necessarily subscribed to these administrative boundaries? So yes, very important elements. Thank you very much. And maybe to finish, we have a little more time. So maybe two key points, given that everyone is working on this perspective of analysis and response to climate change risk. Maybe you can define the 2 or 3 following steps to strengthen the urban agenda so that it can truly integrate a climate risk analysis to have more resilient urban development, resilient to climate. Very briefly, Ligia, if you could give us a couple of key aspects. The way that we are going to take that on is that in January, we are going to start with an interactive atlas of climate risk with the 10 sectors that we have in the NDC. So we will have to look at each one of those climate risks and apply it to a municipal map. Here we have had some advances in one municipality. We started that last year and we used it as a pilot or model, especially to develop municipal regulation, and that is Oyoku. And this is where they started with the inventory so that they can have their emission reduction plan, reduction of carbon footprint, and municipal risk. But you do have this complexity of how do you apply boundaries. So what we decided was that we're going to create this interactive atlas and allow us to overlap it to the surface of the municipality and then see how each sector behaves or is affected by climate risk in the municipality and then advance. Great. So starting with the production of information that can allow you to improve or strengthen planning. Thank you very much, Ligia. Fernando? For the state of Veracruz, where I work, the following steps that we are proposing are create regional agendas for climate change, especially in the big cities for Veracruz. These are 7 big cities. These are cities that have populations that are about 500,000 inhabitants to more than 1 million. And they include many municipalities. For example, the metropolitan area of the Orizaba city, which includes 15 municipalities that have similar problems and obviously have to be addressed from a watershed basin approach. And I think we think this is important because the water and waste management problems and other problems, erosion, flooding, and meteorological effects, generally the basin focus or approach is fundamental to be able to prevent and adapt to climate change. And it's also important to have an advance on having the legal tools so that the territorial ecological organization has a climate change approach. We have one single example from the state of Veracruz, and that is a coastal zone, the municipality of Alvarado, and its territorial organization was created with that focus. And what the focus does is change the measures and actions and limitations radically, and therefore prevents impacts such as the loss of coastline, etc. So those steps are fundamental to advance in the legal organization and actions. Thank you very much, Fernando. Here we have some elements that are related to planning tools and coordination or entities and the analysis that has been mentioned many times today. Thank you. Now, Mario, I think that we can summarize this in one word, articulation. The next step, well, we have more or less said it in the agenda, and it's, well, maybe I invented the word, but I made operative a working group that was generated through the building of NAP cities. So with this plan that is made and that has different strategic lines and different measures such as 2050 horizon, we want to have operative plans that establish small goals that can be built and implemented. And this obviously is meant to be connected to the different initiatives, the initiatives that come up. The CityAdapt project itself, the Nature for Cities, sorry, that fits pretty well with some of the projections and needs that we had identified in NAP cities, and that has to be coordinated with our entities. So that's why I was talking about this coordination or articulation. One of the biggest challenges that we have in the second NDC is to reflect the needs within the measures for the areas of adaptations. Well, we call them areas of adaptation. They include more than just one sector. And to be able to follow and understand that we're starting a cycle where adaptation will be enriched by the national adaptation plans that we have in the horizon. So this is our main challenge, and we believe that this will lead us to build and improve. Thank you very much, Mario. I got a very important message from that, and I think this is what I got from this intervention and the others, and that is that we need a small or huge, maybe, transformation in our understanding and interpretation of territory and the way that we manage territory and the stakeholders that have to collaborate in management of a territory and how we carry out our activity. And I think that's no small effort and therefore requires a lot of work, a lot of dialogue, cooperation, and articulation, indeed. And well, I think that this is a good idea to finish this event with, because I think this is what the heart of this core of this platform is to create that interaction, dialogue, exchange of experiences that can be used to, in the end, accelerate climate actions. That is what we need to do urgently amongst all of us. Well, and with this, I would like to thank the three participants very much. We'd also like to thank our speakers, Juan and Horst. And I also wanted to thank our interpreter, Carmina, who has been doing great work. We're sorry if we spoke too fast, and our colleagues from Practical Action that are stakeholders that are participating in this proposal or in this initiative, sorry, and that are helping us with the online element of the platform and also the communications of this initiative. So thank you very much. We thank them for their support today, and thank you everyone for participating. We'll stay in touch soon so that we can continue with this work. And thank you and good day.